Hello, everybody. Okay, so now that we've got our image posterized, we've taken it into iPicky. I went ahead and I just took my pencil here. I'm going to turn it so you can see it a little bit better on the camera. I went and kind of drew out the shapes where I want to change up my values. So over here, I've got my 7 value steps. I just did some color swatches down here. And to make things a little bit easier, I'm just going to grab my pen and I would go ahead and label each one of these steps. 1, step 2, 3, 4, 5. I must have skipped this one here. 1, 2, 3, 4, step 5. Step 6 and step 7. So you needed to have a minimum of 7 values. For this one, I just chose to work with different shades of blue that I'm going to bring in. And once you decide what your values are, you're then going to label them on your map as to where you're going to switch out those values. So you'll see right here, I've got a number 1. So that correlates with my first tint here. 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6, and all the way down to my darkest tones, which I would just label with a number 7. And this is just on my printed copy. That's why it's so important to be able to have a printed copy to work from. Think of it as a map for your different values and where you're going to add them in on either your celebrity, your architecture, your pet, whatever the subject matter might be. So now I've got a good map. I know where I'm going with my design. Then on my canvas, I went ahead and I just re-sketched in the basic shape of the puppy. So you see this puppy has lots of different tones on its face, different values, and I just sketched out the basic shape of the puppy. If you have trouble with just freehand sketching out the shapes, you could create a grid design right over the top of this sheet, and that's very similar to the ones we've worked on in the past, where you're just going to kind of block it out into smaller square segments with your pencil. And nobody's ever going to see this rough copy, so you can make this as dirty as you absolutely need it to be, and then bring your lines across this way. Usually a 1-to-1 ratio will work the best for that. And you could sketch out that same grid on here and just work square for square. Again, depends on your style and what you want to do for your piece. So now I've kind of gone through and I'm looking back at my picture here and deciding where I still need to add in a few little spots. There's a couple areas over on this cheek that I would like to bring into my design. So over here on the left-hand side, I made this a little bit darker so you could go ahead and see it on the video camera. But let's say there's a spot right here. I'm just going to take a pencil and sort of sketch that shape in. So she's got a little bit of a lighter spot right next to her nose. So I go in and sketch that in. And I'm trying to take a look. I could define some of the lines just to make it a little bit easier for me to see all the different changes that I want to do. And there's a couple down over in this area. I'm just kind of freehanding, adding it in with my pencil. And you would do this right on top of your canvas. I did say I've got 7 color values here. What I did is I just mixed up the colors on my palette, and I'm going to do one quick mix for you so you can kind of see. Let's say I want to recreate this lightest shade right here. So this one is my basic blue, and I'm going to create tints of that blue over here and shades of that blue over on this side. So I'm using all 7 steps to create maybe the lightest one. I'm just going to take, and I'm trying out the dollar store paints. They seem to be pretty good. So I'm just going to take and add in a little bit of the white since I want to go with a nice light tint. Close that up so it doesn't make a mess. And I'm just going to add in maybe a little bit of the blue. Okay. So now I have pretty equal proportions here. I'll grab my paint knife here, and I'm just gonna fully mix the two colors together. And you could do this with a brush, you could do this with a popsicle stick, it really doesn't matter. You just wanna make sure they're both mixed up fully together so that the pigments are mixing. And if you mix the color and you're not really liking it, you could go in and add, so this is a tint, so I'm gonna add a little bit more white into that. I'm gonna dip right in and get a little bit more. And for this project, you're not doing a whole lot of color mixing on the palette, so it is nice to fill the different wells with the different shades that you're gonna be focusing on. Okay, so that's pretty well good. I'm off my palette here. When I'm working on a painting, I do like to have handy just some extra paper towel, a small little dish for your water. And what I'm going to be using is just 2 medium paint brushes, and this one's a little bit of a finer tip for some of the small areas that I'm going to go into. So I've got all my colors mixed up. Now I can move my map aside. And it's up to you whether you want to start with your lightest shade or your darkest shade first. I think for the demo purposes, I'm just going to go in with this darkest shade of the blue right here, number 7. So all of my really dark areas are going to be painted with the coordinating color. Bring it up to the light so you can see the different colors on here. This one reads pretty dark in real life. It's not as dark as what it's shown up on the camera. So all of these would be the shades. My middle hue right here, this would be my basic color, and then the tints of that color are right off to the side. So I'm just going to dip in to my darkest shade. Load up a good amount. Notice that when I'm moving around my brush, it's not actually dripping. So I've got enough loaded, but it's not dripping off. And then you're going to start taking it over to your painting wherever you marked number 7. And I'm going to turn my canvas. So this really dark area here coordinates with this dark area up here on the ear. Kind of tricky getting everything in the frame. Maybe I'll do it like this so you can see it. All right, so then I'm just going to start adding in my darkest color, carefully going up to my line, but not going over the top of my line. And I'm just dragging the pigment down, trying to get my line nice and crisp. You can see I'm starting to run out of paint here, and the tooth of the canvas is becoming visible. So in that case, I would dip back in, grab a little bit more pigment, and just smooth out that color. You should not be seeing any of the canvas peeking through your color. Grab a little bit more. And here I'm going into some of the other shapes. So I'm just turning my brush so I can get up to it without going over it. Now on these inside lines where it's getting a little tighter, I'm not going to bring pigment right up to that right now. I'll probably switch it out and use one of my smaller brushes. And notice I'm turning my brush to fit whatever the shape is. You would continue on working the rest of shade number 7 in. I'm just grabbing my other little brush off camera here so I can get in. And I'm not really sure with my lines if I should bring this color any further down. So I'm looking back at my reference photo and it looks like it does end there. So then I'm just going to extend it over into this other small area and not bring it down any further. Just Bringing that up. Turn my canvas so my hand isn't dragging through the paint. Again, I don't want to have to rework this area later on, so I'm taking my time, wiggling my brush a little bit to hide any of the canvas tooth. And it looks like it extends a little bit further up into here. So that would be the first shade, my darkest shade, number 7. Taking a look at my map again, it looks like number 7 happens again on the right side of the ear in this little shape here. So I do have enough paint mixed up. I'm just going to start adding that in. So I like to go around my edges with my smaller little brush. And I can pull the pigment down. And if you go up around your edges, then you could take your bigger brush into these inside sections and it just helps with time. Again, you can start with your lightest tone or your darkest shade. That's completely up to you. There's no wrong answer with that. But I would go through and do all of the areas that are labeled number 7 before I moved into maybe number 6 and then down to 5. So a lot of this is kind of like making your own paint by numbers. All right, if you have any questions about this step, please feel free to reach out to me and let me know. Okay, so far I've got all of my step 7 down onto my canvas. There's a couple areas that I definitely want to go back in and fix up. So you can see, like up here by the face, it got a little bit thin with the paint. I'm going to try to make this where you can see it. Got a little bit thin, so I definitely want to go back into that area and fix that up. And there's some areas where the jagged edges got a little bit away from me, but the good thing about acrylic paint is you can always go in and paint over just about anything. And it's going to be really, really important that you keep your reference photo handy, because as I'm kind of going through, there's a few spots like in this area, which would be a number 6. I think it would have been really helpful if I just wrote, you know, number 6 down on my canvas. So as I'm going through, I can just look for all the number 6s and go ahead and add that in. So now I'm going to move on to number 6. I'm just cleaning down my brush with my fresh water and kind of wiping off that extra dark paint on here. Again, going to position where my mapping is right in front of me. So as I'm working, I can be taking a look at the original photo here. And now I'm going to start adding in my number 6. So anywhere on my canvas where the next darkest shade appears is where I'm going to be adding this in. I know for sure down here in this corner, I want to add a little bit, and I might bring a few little whiskers out on this side. I'm just going to play around with it. So I'm just dipping right in to step 6 on my palette, same colors. And what I'm doing in between while it's drying, while my canvas is drying, is I just have it covered with a little bit of cellophane so that my paints don't dry out. And actually, the dollar store paints are pretty decent quality so far. So now I'm going to go through and add in my next layer. Things are still a little bit wet for me, but I'm just going to wiggle my brush in right up to those edges of number 7. And you know, if it's not perfect, it's not a big deal. Nobody's going to see your original reference photo. So you can make some artistic choices here. And if you feel like a patch should be a little bit bigger or darker, you can go back in and rework that right out. So I've got my step 6 down. Hopefully you can see the difference between the two. Subtle, but it's there, and it shows up a little bit better in real life too. So that would be one spot. And then I want to go in with a little bit of shading right next to in here. And I'm kind of overlapping some of the values because I feel like it makes my design have some more interest in it. So I'm going to continue on bringing step 6 up and around. And I want to bring it down into a little patch over here. Again, as I'm working, I'm taking a look at my reference photo and making sure that I'm putting that value in the right spots. So I feel like I could take my smaller little brush as I'm getting into some of these areas, but I might go back in and kind of fine tune that out too. There's a few other areas over here. I said I might bring out maybe, I don't know, a little bit of whiskers. So I'm just loading up my brush, not too much, and I'm just going to give kind of a jagged edge so we get that fluffy puppy feeling just of the fur. And I'm turning my brush as I'm coming down to the end here and playing with the line shape and just bringing that right up and around. Now I would continue adding in all of my step 6, moving back to 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, but I'm going to pause it here and we'll step back in as soon as I get this step 6 finished up.